the way that the leader acts, the rest of the team is going to act that way as well, is the way that I view it. And so I think as a leader, it's very important that someone is very poised, someone is very confident. And a lot of these things, again, I used to associate with extroversion for some reason. And it turns out that a lot of this is associated more so with introverts. There are so many amazing introvert leaders out there. And so I think that someone that's able to have a level head, someone that's able to make good decisions, someone that has empathy for their team and the people they work with, for me, those are the traits of a good leader.
Hello, and welcome to episode 162 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review. That would mean a lot to me. Tell a friend about the podcast and help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. So meet Terrance Lee, also known as the introvert leader. Despite shying away from leadership roles due to early experiences with public speaking, Terrance's journey took a turn when necessity pushed him into leadership at his first engineering job. Since then, he's thrived in leadership and management roles at Fortune 500 companies in aerospace and defense. With a track record of leading large teams and authoring the best-selling Quiet Voice Fearless Leader, Terrance empowers others to awaken their inner leadership potential. All right. Well, welcome back to the Quiet and Strong podcast, Terrance. Terrance, it's great to have you on today.
Thank you so much. I am very excited to be here.
And it's a welcome back because you were on episode 41. That was quite some time ago, talking about your first book. And now today we're going to talk about your second book.
Yeah. And I remember that conversation like it was yesterday. It's amazing how time just flies. So,
yeah, absolutely. So people can go back and listen to episode 41, but let's go ahead and introduce yourselves for those that haven't heard that. Tell us about yourself and just your journey through introversion to becoming a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm one of these people that I would say was definitely when I was growing up, I moved around a lot. And I was a pretty loud kid in the beginning. That's the way I describe myself to people. Because we moved around so much, I was a kid that used to try to get attention and used to try to make new friends and things like that early on. But I also had a side of me that enjoyed writing, enjoyed time alone, time to myself. So, there was that. And when I was 13 in the seventh grade, I had an experience with a choir director that really shifted a lot of things for me. So she was pretty hard on me. And long story short, one particular day, I was singing in the tenor section of our choir, and it was our turn to start singing. And I started to sing. And in front of the entire choir, she stopped playing the piano, slammed the piano cover down, looked directly at me, and she told me, "Terrance Lee, you need to stop singing right now," in a very aggressive tone in front of all the kids in the choir. And it's pretty traumatic, if I'm honest. And that really was a turning point for me. After that day, I was no longer the kid that was talking a lot, would just pretty much be in the back of the class, would never raise my hand. I never really wanted to lead anything or speak up much at all. And that carried into my middle school years, my high school years, even when I graduated college and first got in my career. I found myself as a engineer, and I, have these ideas I'd want to bring up in meetings, and I just wouldn't say them. I would keep my thoughts to myself, and I didn't make the connection that it was back to that moment when I was 13. And eventually, I was what I say kind of forced into leadership because my mentor at the time put in his 2-week notice, and there was a very big presentation coming up in front of a lot of the engineers and the pilots that we were doing designs for. And so I was the one that was told I was going to do that presentation, and I was not ready at all. I was super nervous, but I did the presentation, and surprisingly, it went really well. And that day was a turning point for me. So after that day, people started to tell me that they saw leadership potential in me. I began to get leadership opportunities within my role at that company. I then went to another aerospace company, got more leadership opportunities there. And today, I'm now an associate director at an aerospace defense company here in the McKinney, Texas area. So I say all that to say, I like to tell people the story because I consider myself to be someone that really doubted myself. I really thought that my introversion and my nature of being was holding me back. And what I ended up learning was I learned how to really use my introversion to a strength and a power. So that's my story. And that's why I'm here.
Yeah, a couple things. Wow, thank you for sharing your story. And that's terrible what happened in choir. That's I'm sorry for that. And then how long were you on the job before you had to give this presentation?
Not long at all. So I started in June of 2005 and I was under my mentor for about 10 months and he gave his notice and it was completely unexpected. He was a very, very sharp guy. I mean, very sharp, knew his stuff. And he put in his notice and I had about 2 weeks to get ready for this presentation. So, imagine a kid fresh out of college that's having to present some highly technical information and on top of that is not fond of public speaking, does not like talking in front of people at all. So that was really an interesting scenario, but it worked out well. And it really was a turning point.
Yeah, and you do plenty of public speaking now, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love how you say that you learned to embrace your introverted gifts. When was it that you put your finger on that, the term introversion, and then how did you embrace it?
Great question. What's interesting about it is for so long, I didn't know what introversion or extroversion really meant. I just knew that in certain situations, if I was around groups of people for too long, I would want to break away. I knew that I was more productive when I was working by myself instead of in large groups. There were all of these things that I knew about myself, but I didn't know what to call it or I didn't know what any of it meant. And to be honest, when I started writing the book, Quiet Voice, Fearless Leader, this was in the late 2020 time frame when I thought about the book, came up with it. It was really around that time, that year, that I began to understand what introversion really meant. So, I mean, it took a while. For a long time, I didn't really associate how I was with that term, introvert. So it took a while.
What was the turning point? Like, when did you say, yeah, this is a good thing?
Another great question. I think that as I was writing the book and reflecting on my leadership journey and reflecting on how I was able to use a lot of introvert strengths to my advantage, things like being able to observe, being a very strong observer, being an active listener, being a deep thinker. I think when I began to look back, it was like, oh, I naturally do a lot of this stuff. I really embraced it at that point. So really, when I was writing the book, that's where a lot of the concept for the book came from, was just reflecting on, wow, I've been able to use introversion to my advantage. And
Yeah.
at that, really leaned into it.
Yeah. And the last thing you said, reflecting, that's a superpower that we have. So deep thinking and being reflective, and we can all, we have these gifts and we just need to learn how to use them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we talk about strengths, so we're talking about strengths of introverts here. And we bust myths. I can't remember what myth you busted last time, but do you have one in your head right now, a myth about introversion that you want to dispel?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I love busting the introvert myths that people have out there. I think one of the more common ones, so especially like in corporate or business settings, what happens is people are in a room and a lot of it is really about adding value, right? So, someone is sitting in a meeting or sitting in a room. If someone is there and doesn't really say anything, or there's a lot of dialogue going on and they're kind of sitting back, not speaking, I think one big myth out there is that that person is quiet or they essentially don't have any value to add, right? And the people that are dominating the conversation, doing the most talking, people would look at them and assume that's the leader in the room or that these people are adding the most value. And I think a very big misconception with that is that oftentimes for someone that's an introvert, it may be that we're sitting there and we have a lot to add to the conversation. We have the most value to add, we're just sitting there thinking. We're thinking about what we have to say. We're processing our thoughts. We're listening to other people speak. And then when we do insert what we have to say, it's going to be very well thought out and it's going to be a good input. It just may take us a minute to process our thoughts and get that out. So I think just the myth that introverts are quiet or, shy, don't have anything to add. I don't like when I hear those things because I know not just myself, but so many fellow introverts that I've worked with that are the same way. And we speak up, people listen, and people are amazed at some of the input that we give.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great one. And people say there's a myth, along those lines that we don't have anything to say, but we have a lot to say because we're always thinking. Our minds are always going. And it's just a matter of we're not sharing everything. We're putting together what we think is most important. And where extroverts are often thinking out loud, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just different. But because of that, there's a perception, like you're saying, that we don't have anything to say, but it's just a matter of we do, but we're just not saying everything. We're thinking, okay, what do I want to share here? What's the key message I want to say? And that can be misperceived.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you have any advice along those lines as far as getting prepared to speak up for a meeting or that kind of thing?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I think one of the first things, and I dealt with this for a long time. I dealt with what I would just call like imposter syndrome or self-doubt, where I would be in rooms and I would think that the people that were talking the most, that they deserve to be there, that, they deserve to talk more. And what I had to say didn't matter as much. Or I may actually think what I had to say mattered, but just having the courage to speak up and say it, right? Like there was a certain roadblock there. So I think the first thing is getting through the mental roadblocks that may be there for some people if they feel that way. The first thing is to realize that your words matter. I think that's the very first thing, and that you absolutely deserve to be in the room or on the phone call or whatever the situation is. I think that's the very first step. And then one of the other things that happens is when people, I think, are dominating a conversation, oftentimes extroverts that are going back and forth in these rooms, as the introverted time, trying to figure out how to get our words in, or we're trying to figure out how to jump into that. And one thing that I say there is one thing I do is I take notes, like as a conversation's going on, because we think very deeply sometimes. There will be a point that somebody makes, and I don't want to forget my thought. So I'll actually write down the thing that I was thinking. And I'm just kind of taking mental notes. So I'm listening to what people are saying. I'm letting them talk. I'm letting them go. But I'm taking notes about the things that I want to add and want to say. And I do that because, again, as introverts, sometimes we can overthink or think very deeply. Our mind can go in different directions. So I don't want to forget that point. And so when the moment comes for me to interject, then, I have my notes and I kind of know where I'm going. So that's something that's been very helpful for me. And I think it starts with just knowing that your words matter and getting that input in. And then just making sure that when you do give the input, you kind of have it laid out what you're looking to say.
Yeah, that's great. And sometimes you might be in a meeting and you get, like you're saying, you get an idea, and maybe it's not even related, but somebody says something and you're like, yeah, I need to make that point here, or it might just be something that you need for later. So definitely capturing our ideas is another really important thing for us introverts, because we do have a lot of ideas.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of them.
All right, Terrance, we're going to get into your second book, but first, tell us a little bit more about your first book, and I'm going to read the title. So, what is the main message of your first book, Quiet Voice, Fearless Leader, 10 Principles for Introverts to Awaken the Leader Inside?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that I view my writing is I want every book to have a core theme. And so what I would say for Quiet Voice, Fearless Leader, the core theme of the book really was that introversion is a superpower. Because I know there are so many introverts that were probably like me at some point. They either were like me or they may still, be that way now listening to this, where they viewed their introversion as a crutch, or they viewed it as something that was holding them back from being successful or getting to their next level. And I really wanted to drive home the point that introversion is a superpower and give specific examples of why it is. And on top of that, specifically giving a base for leadership. So 10 core principles for introverts as leaders. And so that's really what it was about was, hey, introversion is your superpower. And here are reasons why. And here are 10 core principles in leadership to help you to lead teams effectively and lead teams well. So that's really what it was about.
Okay. So what makes a great leader?
Great question. Loaded question as well.
Yeah.
I think there is so many, you could ask probably 10 people that question and get like 10 different answers. And I think for me, a lot of it is poise. A lot of it is the way that the leader acts, the rest of the team is going to act that way as well, is the way that I view it. And so I think as a leader, it's very important that someone is very poised, someone is very confident. And a lot of these things, again, I used to associate with extroversion for some reason. And it turns out that a lot of this is associated more so with introverts. There are so many amazing introvert leaders out there. And so I think that someone that's able to have a level head, someone that's able to make good decisions, someone that has empathy for their team and the people they work with. For me, those are the traits of a good leader. I don't necessarily view a good leader in the way that I used to, which was the loudest person in the room or the person that talked the most or the person that was most dominant in a conversation. I don't necessarily associate that with leadership. Not to say that, a leader does need to speak up at times, right? A leader does need to be vocal. So I'm not saying that, but just what I used to view leadership as is completely different now from how it was back then.
Yeah, there's another myth right there that the great leader has to be large and in charge, and
Yeah.
and the other part of it is that the myth that when people say introverts can't be great leaders, and to us that's ridiculous because we know that that's not true, and that's why we're talking today. So one thing I do say though, when it comes to leadership or other aspects of our lives, sometimes our approach is going to be different. So like with leadership, I can be an amazing leader as an introvert, but my approach, there might be some things that I do a little bit differently than an extroverted colleague. What strategies would you say might be different for introverts versus an extrovert?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that knowing what your strengths are as an introvert are very key. So for example, for me, and I'll make it personal, I think that I do very well in one-on-one conversations as opposed to necessarily group conversations. Now, I can have a conversation in a team meeting. Don't get me wrong. I can have conversations on calls and in meetings with a team. I do that all the time. But a lot of my best work and my most productive conversations I've noticed are when it's a one-on-one type of interaction. And a lot of introverts are the same way. And so I think that knowing what works for you as an introvert and as a leader. The other thing is working alone versus working in large groups. A lot of introverts, because of our need to recharge and the fact that being around too many people for too long can be draining, oftentimes we're more productive when we're working to ourselves. And for me, I find that to be true. I think I get a lot done when I'm able to have that alone time to really focus and hone in on my thoughts. So again, I can work in groups. Not to say that I can't, but I think it starts with knowing yourself and knowing kind of what makes you tick and what works best for you. And for a lot of introverts, I think when we're able to work alone and we're able to focus, that really helps out.
Yeah, and we absolutely there's a balance there, And it's not just about recharge. We do need time to recharge after certain things, but we need some time to be strategic, to get some work done, to think about things, and we need both. And we absolutely thrive in one-on-one or maybe smaller groups. And it's not that you can't lead a big team meeting because I'm sure you've done it plenty of times. You can. You might bring some introverted strategies into doing that, but it is good to know, you know what? And you just have to think about, all right, this particular meeting, it'll be really good to get this one person, and just chat with them one-on-one kind of thing. But you just have to bring your strategy, but it's probably going to be from an introverted perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for introverts that lack confidence, what would you say are some keys to gaining confidence as an introverted leader?
Yeah, yeah. So, good question. I want to start with this. I think that for sure, you can be an introvert and naturally have confidence. Because I do think that one thing that I used to think for a while was I just assumed that being an introvert meant that you lacked confidence. I didn't associate the word introvert with confidence. And the reality is, if someone is listening to this and they just assume, oh, well, I'm an introvert, it means I'm not confident, or there's no research. And I've been doing a lot of research into introversion and extroversion personality types the past few years, and there's no research that suggests being an introvert it means you lack confidence. So I want to start
Right.
there.
Right.
Being an introvert does not mean you don't feel confident. Now, saying that, I will say this: for me, I did lack confidence for a long time. I lacked confidence in terms of speaking in front of people. I lacked confidence in terms of just self-doubt, certain things I had mentally going on. But a lot of that actually stemmed back to the situation with the choir director from when I was 13, right? So it wasn't that it was because I was an introvert. It's because I had a traumatic experience and it impacted me. So for people, to your question, that are introverts that may be struggling with confidence, I would first start with knowing who you are. So think about, well, who am I? What makes me tick, right? What do I enjoy doing? What do I not enjoy doing? Like kind of knowing really your center of who you are. I think that's very important. And then I think the next thing is to recognize what I like to call just negative self talk. Like, what is some of the negative self talk? If you're lacking confidence, what are the things that you might be saying to yourself or the thoughts that enter your head that cause you to not feel confident? Like identifying those and pointing those out. So for me, a lot of it was when I was about to lead a meeting or present or speak in front of a group of people, there would be this voice and it was just like, you're not ready for this. You can't do this. You're nervous. Like there were literally these thoughts I would have. And I had to stop at one point and think to myself, where is this coming from? And is all this even true? And turned out, no, it wasn't true. It was, doubts that I was putting in my head. So I think pointing those things out and realizing what are the thoughts or the things you might be saying to yourself that are holding you back, and then flipping those with positive thoughts and positive words. So starting to say things like, I'm the best speaker in the room. It's something that I started saying to myself several years ago whenever I had a big presentation at work. And it might sound silly to do something like that, but it really made a huge difference for me. So, anyone listen to this that might be struggling with confidence as an introvert, I would say to come up with a power phrase, come up with something that when you say it or think it, it makes you feel empowered and makes you feel confident. Those things make a big difference.
Absolutely. And yeah, there are introverts out there that have been confident their whole lives. It wasn't me. Okay, that wasn't me. But I know some really confident and outspoken introverts. And sometimes, of course, people that have the misconception that introversion means shyness or lack of confidence might not count them in the introvert group. But there's some that have never struggled. Someone like myself, I did struggle, but part of gaining confidence was just what we're talking about today, Terrance. Just knowing, hey, this introversion, it's a great thing. I have some needs, but I have some great strengths. And that gave me confidence right there. And so anybody that's lacking confidence, you gave some great advice. They can gain it, absolutely. But part of it might be stemming from really knowing who you are and whether you're an introvert or extrovert and what your gifts are.
Yeah, yeah. And so many people don't know, a lot of people, I think we kind of go through life. But once you start to realize, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'm an introvert and this is what that means. These are the great things about it and accept it. I mean, that really helps with confidence.
Yeah. Okay, so your next book is coming out soon. Let's get into that. The Calm Effect: 5 Keys for Introverts to Succeed Without Stress and Lead with Poise. That sounds great.
Yeah, appreciate it.
So what are the 5 keys?
Yeah, absolutely. So this book, it's interesting. For years, I've had a lot of people that I work with and have done business with, and they'll say things like, "Terrance, you're so calm. How are you so calm?" And I wanted to put some of those keys into a book because I realized that, when I wrote Quiet Voice Fearless Leader, that was kind of, the base of leadership, right? And these are keys to grow as an introvert, as a leader, I wanted to get into specific tips from a stance of intentional calmness and being able to practice intentional calmness in leadership, and what are the benefits of doing that. So the 5 keys, the first key is poise. So I spoke about that a little bit earlier, but just how to develop poise and the importance of developing poise and having that as a leader. The next key is patience. So a lot of people in conversations and even just with actions at work are very quick to act and very quick to speak. Well, there's actually a lot that comes when we're able to be patient and we just notice certain things and we catch things that other people are missing. So we talk a lot about that in the second chapter. The second key is observation, which is something that a lot of introverts are naturally good at. So we talk about specific things to observe as a leader. And when you do that, the things you're able to pick up on and help your team with. The fourth is connection. So with that, we're now talking about the ability to connect deeply with people. It's funny that so many people associate introversion with like not wanting to talk to people or being to ourselves and things like that. But in actuality, we typically connect the best with people because we're actively listening. We're really into what they're saying. And so we talk about just as leaders, how we can really connect with our teammates and connect with other people. And then the last key is relaxation. We oftentimes introverts can overthink, or, we're just in situations where we're just go all the time, or we're around people a lot. And so the need to recharge, the need to relax, like the way that helps us as introverts is what we get into in the last chapter. So a little bit of a different angle from Quiet Voice Fearless Leader, and I'm really excited about it. And, really the goal is any introverts out there that may feel anxious about their introversion or may overthink or feel stressed about situations, just helping them to change that perspective and really walk in intentional calmness.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Appreciate it.
So, just overall, what's the benefit of having a calm leader?
Great question. Great question. So, again, I think that so much in leadership, it really flows down through the rest of the team. So however things are in the top of an organization, the attitude, the demeanor, all of that flows through the rest of the organization. And so I've seen situations throughout my career where there were leaders that were not calm. I've worked with some leaders that were very erratic, were very reactive, some that at times would just flat out get angry. I've seen a wide range of different styles of leadership. And the benefits of having a calm leader, I believe, is that when you're calm and you're poised, you're able to connect with people. You're able to observe situations and help people in different scenarios. Then that flows through the rest of the organization. So now everyone looks at the leader and they realize, oh, everything is going wrong right now. We missed some delivery or something happened and things are wrong. But this leader still seems calm. This leader still seems like they have it all together. I guess I can also be calm, right? When the leader is running around with their hair on fire or, confused and things like that, that flows through the rest of the organization. So I think there are so many benefits. A lot of them are intangible, but so much is there when someone leads a team with a calm demeanor.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be all right. Definitely, I know the benefit of being calm, but do you ever have to let people know, hey, I'm calm. This is going to be okay, but I am concerned about this particular issue?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the things too. And I say that at the beginning of the book is that I don't want anyone to think that the calm effect and the whole concept of it in any way means that you are never concerned or you never are going to have issues, right? Because the reality is things are going to go wrong. There are going to be issues. There are going to be times and days where things are just hard, right? I mean, it's going to happen. So it doesn't mean that the calm effect is this lifeless perfection where you're never worried about things. But what it does mean is it gives you a different approach for when those times happen. And so, yeah, for sure, when things go wrong, there have been times even recently with the team that I work with when I've had to admit, like, hey guys, I don't have the answer right now. I'm really going to have to go and have some conversations and figure some things out. I actually think in a way, a team appreciates that when they see that their leader isn't necessarily, they don't always have it all figured out. They don't know everything, right? it makes it where you're a little more transparent. And I think that's okay.
Yeah. So I know in your latest book you talk about overthinking, and we chatted a bit before we hit record. I think introverts actually tend to be a little more prone to overthinking because we're tuned into our minds more often than not. So, what are some tips for introverts that are overthinking?
Yeah, yeah, great one. And I will admit, as I answer this, that I'm an overthinker myself. So this is one that I continue to work through. So for sure. So I think that, a few tips. So one thing is realizing that it's okay to not be perfect. I think that as introverts, a lot of times our overthinking can come because we're working on something or we have some task and we're trying to make sure that everything about that thing, we just get it all right. Right. Like we don't want there to be any mistakes. We're thinking about what could go wrong. And that can lead us down a path of overthinking, and ultimately it's okay sometimes to not have the perfect solution as long as we're doing our best, as long as we're putting our best foot forward, then that's really all we can do. And if things don't turn out perfect or don't go completely the way that we want, that's okay. And so there's a certain level of acceptance that I think we have to have with that. The other thing too with overthinking is that to just kind of realize that it wastes a lot of time sometimes. Because I know for me, the things that I'll overthink about sometimes, it's scenarios that are literally never going to happen, or scenarios that the chance of it happening is so slim that I shouldn't be worried about it, but I'll still worry about it. So for everyone, anyone listening to this, if that's you, I would say to just, realize that when we think through some of these scenarios, it really wastes a lot of our time and our energy. And, ultimately, we don't want to do that. It's not always going to be the worst case scenario. Things aren't always going to go the way that we're thinking. Just realize that it can be a waste of time if it doesn't benefit us.
Yeah, so many things I think we overthink about never happen. It's just like you're saying, it was a waste of time.
Exactly.
So it's really about we have to change our thoughts around whatever we're overthinking about, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Like, what is the thing that we're overthinking about? How is it benefiting us to think about it? Is it really benefiting? And in some cases, like, if we have some big project or something that's very important and we need to think deeply about that thing, then that's different, right? That's just our putting our thoughts into something. But I think if we're overthinking about some scenario that, we've either made up or it's something that doesn't benefit us, then yeah, we need to let that go.
All right. Well, Terrence, in addition to being an author and a lot of other things, you also have a podcast. Tell us about the Introvert Experience podcast.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So the Introvert Experience, formerly called Quiet Voice, Fearless Mind, is a podcast where I'm just talking about all things introversion. I have changed the format quite a bit since I did Quiet Voice, Fearless Mind. So the episodes are shorter. I'm also not doing much editing. So it's really me ranting about different topics, kind of giving my thoughts on it. And it's really been nice. It's, really help with my kind of just time management and things that I'm doing. And I really think people enjoy it because it's really just kind of stream of consciousness and talking about topics that introverts care about.
All right. What's a couple examples of topics that you have had on your show or you want to have on your show?
Yeah, great question. So one that I just recorded actually is about introversion and HSP or highly sensitive people. Because one thing that I was curious about was are introverts, naturally highly sensitive or are extroverts highly sensitive? So I did some research into that and I had an episode on that topic. I also talked in one episode about calmness, kind of going back to the calm effect and are introverts more calm or extroverts more calm? Or, is calmness tied to a personality type or not? So that's just an example. But yeah, there will be several others. Those are just a few that I recently reported.
Okay. Are you a highly sensitive person?
Yes,
Okay.
I didn't realize it, but recently as I've started to understand what it means, I'd say I definitely fit the criteria for it.
Yeah, and I mean, so I'm not. I don't know why, I don't know why we're all created a little differently, but I've had a lot of guests on talking about it, being a highly sensitive person, or I'm also not an empath. But it's so important to have the conversation because it's not just about, my gifts and strengths, it's everybody's. Because if I'm very self-aware, but nobody else is self-aware, that's not going to help. We really need to all get together and talk about how we complement each other with strengths and gifts. And I love that that's part of your podcast, talking about, different personalities and different personality traits.
For sure. Yeah, I appreciate it. And it's learning, there's so much out there to learn and there's a lot that I don't know. And that's why I like to talk about it because I just want to continue to learn more and try to help people.
Yeah. So, just thinking about all this leads to my next question. Cause like, again, you're an author, you have a podcast, you have a full-time job, maybe more than a full-time job, your family, and you put a lot of content out on social media. So what's your tips for that introvert as far as time management from an introvert perspective?
Yeah, yeah. It's tough. I'm not gonna lie. It's tough, but I am in a much better space with it now than I was before. So recharging is very important, I think, for introverts, especially. And last year, I didn't feel like I did that. I really felt like I was just nonstop on go with no pause, and it was difficult. It was. And so, as far as tips, I'll say that one thing that I had to do last year is I did step back from my podcast, August of last year, and I just had to figure out what made the most sense for me. So I think for anyone listening to this, if you feel overwhelmed or you feel like you just have too much going on, you're trying to figure out how to manage your time, it's really just taking a step back and looking at all the things on your plate. And some things you may have to let go, or some things it may not be about letting it go. It may be, how can I do this smarter? Or how can I do this where it takes less time? The thing that takes me an hour every day to do, how can I do it in 20 minutes? Like those little small steps. And the more that I began to do that, the more that I was able to free more time up. So for me, it's things like if I'm doing content for my week, I'll just take 30 minutes and I'll literally record videos for the entire week in 30 minutes, as opposed to I'm trying to record something every day. That might sound small, but that little tweak made a huge difference for me. With my podcast, I've changed the format of it where my editing and things don't take me as long. With my writing, I've changed my style of writing. I don't put as much pressure on myself to write as much every single day as I was before. Now, if I'm inspired to write, I write. If I'm not, I don't write. It might sound simple, but it actually has really taken a lot of pressure off. So just all of those things I say in terms of tips is just, you know, stepping back and looking at everything on your plate and making sure that you're not overdoing it, that you're leaving time for yourself to recharge, time for yourself to rest, and just doing things smarter instead of taking too much time.
Yeah, and that's definitely a strategy that I've come up with is that you can't do everything, and I think we both have tried, you
Uh,
can't, and you have to really prioritize. Do you have a process where you take time to reflect and prioritize, or how do you do that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So for me, what's pretty nice is like every other Friday, I don't work my full-time job every other Friday. So that's
Okay.
kind of my day to really reflect. That's my day to, I basically plan out my next week and a half. I sit down, I have my calendar, I have a whiteboard, and all the things I want to get done in the next week and a half, I plan it out. And that's helped a lot because I'm really able to prioritize. I also am able to identify the things that I don't need to do, the things on my to-do list that I look at it and I say, you know what, I don't really need to do that. I'm just going to scratch that off, and that just bought me 30 minutes or, that's scratching that thing off might have bought me a few hours. Right. So I think just taking the time to do that is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're doing that in solitude, right? It's an important part of your strategy is giving yourself some time to think.
Absolutely. Yeah. Much needed.
And then the other thing, of course, we need quiet time for many things, time to be strategic, like we're talking about, or reflection, or get some work done. But one thing that you mentioned that we've been talking about, you also need time to recharge. So, in addition to your every other Friday, How do you recharge? Where do you find your quiet time as an introverted leader?
Yeah. So for me, a lot of my, I would say, recharging, and this probably sounds a little counterintuitive because some people would hear this and they would say, oh, well, you're working. But when I'm writing, because I love writing so much, a lot of my recharging comes when I'm able to take my laptop and go somewhere with like a lake or somewhere in nature or something and sit down to myself and just write. That is one of my favorite things to do. So when I get a chance to do that, that really helps me. And so I try to consistently do that or just go to a coffee shop and write or, something like that. Or, go for a run. I mean, I have a lot of different types of things that I do whenever I want to recharge.
Yeah. And I'm really glad you said that because sometimes when I'm talking about recharge, people might think, well, he's taking a break. When's he getting his work done? But sometimes, especially if you're working for somebody else, sometimes it is a matter of maybe you had a really stressful meeting or something and you need to recharge after. Maybe you're not taking a break, so to speak, but you're working quietly and that can be recharging and it is relaxing. So, again, going for a run or getting away and not doing work is awesome. But sometimes throughout the day, we might just be doing some quiet work that's recharging.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
All right, Terrance, we've talked about a lot of great things today. Is there anything that we missed that you want to add?
No, no, this is great. This is great. One thing that I will say is that if anyone wants to get the first chapter of the upcoming book, The Calm Effect, for free, that's available. I have a site for that. So, I'm sure I'll, send that link and you'll have that in the show notes. And I'd love anyone that's interested to get that first chapter and you can get that for free. And then, yeah, definitely looking forward to the book and hopefully hearing feedback from some of your listeners.
Awesome. And so, yeah, I will put that in the show notes, but just in general, where's the best place for people to find out more about your work and the great work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So people can follow me on Instagram at the Introvert Leader, and also subscribe to my YouTube at the Introvert Leader. That's where I'm the most active.
Sounds great. Again, Terrance, it's good to have you back on the podcast. And we'll definitely have to look forward to book number 3 after this and have you back again. So great to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on.
All right. Take care. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts and links to social media channels. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there's now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the 4-letter Myers Briggs code. I'll add a link to the show notes. So many great things about being an introvert, and we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.